He's one of those guys who is so incredibly smart, it's scary. It's actually frightening how smart this guy is. And yet he suffered from some really debilitating illnesses. He had a brain condition, I guess, where he suffered from these terrible migraines. So he was only ever able to write for about 20 minutes at a time, which means that he would write for 20 minutes, and then that act and that focus, something about it, would cause him to develop these terrible migraines where he would be like throwing up and cold sweats and all of that. Now you understand that most people would, well, what's the solution to that? How would you solve something like that? Stop writing, stop doing it. But you understand that he couldn't do that, because that act of writing and doing philosophy is who he was. He was a philosopher. I don't remember if it was in this class. I gave you some advice to pursue your dreams. I said, don't try. Was that this class?
You said don't what?
Don't try.
Oh yeah, it was this class.
Yeah, don't try. Yeah, don't give up. What are the chances that you're going to achieve your dreams? Well, just about zero. There's too much competition. You're probably not good enough. And if you are good enough, you probably won't even have the opportunities to do it. And you're probably going to destine yourself to a life of failure. So don't try. Go find something practical. If I can tell you that, and if that can dissuade you from doing the thing that you want to do, then you shouldn't be doing it. But if everything I just said was true, and you said, yeah, I realize that's all true, but I have to do it. It's in me. It's in my soul. I have to do this. I want to be a musician. That's a terrible idea. Competition's too stiff. Even if you're good enough, the competition is too stiff. There's only so many artists who can be present at any given time. Your stuff has to be the right music at the right time. It's impossible. Don't try. And if you say, yeah, you're right, I'm going to go be an accountant, then you shouldn't have been doing music in the first place. If instead your answer is, yeah, you're probably right, I probably will fail at this, but I have to pursue it because it's the thing that's in my soul, then you should do it. And you should do it. In other words, if you can be talked out of something, you shouldn't be doing it. Okay? So for Nietzsche, that's in his soul. Philosophy is in his soul. He has to do it. Anyway, so if you want a friend, you must also be willing to wage war for him. And that part we typically understand pretty well. You have to be willing to fight for your friend. Now, how far you go, at what point you stop, that's going to be a matter of wisdom. In other words, do you back up your friend even when they're completely wrong? Or do you only back them up in public and then go to them afterwards and tell them, hey man, you were wrong about this? Or do you just back them up and never have that conversation with them? But the natural thing for most people is to never have that conversation, because if you criticize your friend, what's a possible outcome?
They won't like it.
They won't like it and they'll stop being your friend. So now the question is, what's your loyalty to? Is it to the truth? Is it to goodness? Or is it to people? Is it to your friend? Here's the problem. If your loyalty is to your friend, then that means that you're weak. Not weak in the sense that, oh, you need someone with you. Most people need someone with them. But what it means is that you're in a very fragile relationship, that if you don't do what they want you to do, expect you to do, then they're not going to be there for you anymore. And that makes it attractive for some people to compromise their beliefs, to compromise their values. And that means that you're only doing what you're doing because you want to have someone by your side. So is murder wrong? Depends. Are you going to lose your friend if you don't murder? Is stealing wrong? Well, it depends. Are you going to lose your friend if you tell them not to steal something? It makes you weak in the sense that you can no longer stand for principles. Because the highest good in your life is to have people around you. It doesn't matter what kind of people they are. And Nietzsche is all about overcoming weakness, becoming as strong as you possibly can, which means that when there's some sort of suffering in your life, you don't run away from it. You engage it. You roll up your sleeves, you get down in there, and you fight with it. In fact, Nietzsche thought it was a good idea to seek out suffering. And again, this is a guy who knew a lot about suffering. So that act of doing philosophy for him, yes, it was because he had to. It was in him. But it was also this process of overcoming suffering and fighting through it, not just giving up. He actually, as you can see, he dies in 1900. But in 1889, he was in the city of Turin. And he was walking down the street, and he'd already had an eventful life. He became a full professor in his early 20s. and he quit. He resigned from that because he thought that philosophy was stale. It's been said that he said, although I can't find I read Nietzsche, I can't find the quote from him, but it's been said that he said that philosophy was essentially the act of just people using words to attack other words. He thought it was useless, that philosophy was only useful if it was useful. It shouldn't just be us sitting there going, wow, that's a really interesting idea, that's intriguing, and then go home. If philosophy is going to be philosophy, it actually has to shape the way you live. It has to impact the way that you live. And if we understand that it does, well, we should understand that it does. There's a tendency a lot of times for us to say, oh, philosophy, who cares? You guys read about World War II? Yeah, that was him. Yeah, that was him. It wasn't his fault, by the way. It wasn't his fault. And it took a while for the world to kind of come to grips with the fact that it wasn't his fault. In 1889, he has a nervous breakdown, we might call it. And he essentially goes into a catatonic state for the next 11 years before he dies, which means he just sits there and stares and drools probably a lot. He has to have food put into his mouth. He doesn't talk. He never writes again. He never works again. And what brought it about was he was walking down the street in the city of Turin, and there's a horse that's being led by its, I don't know what you call it, owner, jockey, whatever they would be, the person who leads the horse. And the horse is stopped. And because he's stopped, traffic can't go in these two directions. So the guy who owns the horse is trying to push the horse is just kind of burrows down. The guy gets frustrated, he starts whipping the horse. And the more he whips the horse, the more the horse just hunkers in and refuses to move. We don't know. We don't know, but my guess is that Nietzsche probably saw that horse as a metaphor for himself, or at least for a person who's willing to stand on principles. Because the harder they beat this horse, the more they tried to shove it, the more it just hunkered down and refused to move. Even though the whole world around it was telling him it was wrong, the horse refused to move. So he goes running over and he shoves the horse owner away, and he throws his arms around the horse. And he hugs the horse, and he starts saying to the horse, I understand you, I understand you, I understand you. And then from there, he just seems to have a break from reality, and he spends the next 11 years in this catatonic state, during which his sister, I believe her name was Elizabeth, is taking care of him, and she sees his philosophy, she's like, wow, he's pretty good. And he only published a few books in his life by this point. So she gets a hold of a bunch of his manuscripts and reads them and says, I wonder if, and she changes a bunch of stuff in his manuscripts. And then he dies in 1900. And he's an interesting figure because he didn't sell many books during his lifetime. But during those last 11 years, people were coming from all over Europe to see him. His stuff finally caught on. He just didn't live. He didn't live long enough to see that happen. So people from all over Europe are coming to meet the great Nietzsche, and the poor dude's just sitting there in a straitjacket, slobbering on himself. And she would have these tours of, come and meet the great Nietzsche. Come and meet the great professor. And she was making money off this dude, just sitting there in his bed. After he dies, you see the rise of National Socialism in Germany. You know who those folks are, the Nazis. So because the National Socialist Party is trying to create like a strong German national identity, they have a very famous composer, Wagner. He's considered like this quintessential German. He's the guy that they're all going to look to and go, this is the guy who we hold up as like our artistic foundation. And then Elizabeth gets access to the leadership of the Nazi Party and takes his stuff to them, all the stuff that she changed. She put in a bunch of stuff about hating Jews and about racism and stuff like that. And she presents it to the leadership of the party and says, look, my brother Nietzsche, he's a well-known philosopher, but did you know what his real deeper held beliefs were? And they looked at that and they said, this is our German philosopher. This is the guy who we will hold up as like the Nazi philosopher. He had nothing to do with that. In fact, in his writings, we were able to restore what were his original manuscripts. Now we can look at it, we can see those changes. For example, one of the things was that he highly admired the Jews. Because if you look at how the Jews have been persecuted everywhere they've ever gone around the world, well, it makes sense that a guy like that would admire them. Because they were suffering everywhere they went. They were persecuted everywhere they went. And yet, they still were overcoming all that and became very prosperous. So he said he admired their spirit. He admired them a lot. she changes all that to make it so that they're not to be admired, but that they're actually viruses and that they're leeches on society and all that. So for a long time, he had a terrible reputation in the world, until a guy, don't quote me on this, I think it was Walter Kaufman, who translated some of his stuff from the original manuscripts, and then his image gets rehabilitated after that. And then we realize that he had nothing to do with all that. In fact, Nietzsche was very much against joining any kind of a cause. Because when you join a cause, what do you have to do? You have to compromise some of your beliefs. If you join the Democratic Party, you probably have to compromise some of your beliefs in order to belong to that party. You probably don't agree with everything they say. If you join the Republican Party, you probably have to compromise some of your actual beliefs in order to belong to that party. When you do that, Nietzsche said, you make yourself weaker. You make yourself dependent on other people. Instead, you should seek to be independent. So that means that you're going to have to develop your own ideas. You're going to have to be able to protect yourself. And that's a big part of this last section here. To wage war, you must be capable of being an enemy. Not necessarily an enemy to your friend, although he does point that out in some other writing, that you have to be willing to disagree with your friends. As we said a little bit ago, if your friend and you disagree, you should be able to go to them and tell them, I disagree with you about this stuff, and yet still remain friends. If you have a fear of not being able to do that, then you don't have a real friend. So, in order to be a friend, a real friend to a person, you have to be able to do this last part here. So what that means is, let's say that, I don't know if any of you know this person, that one friend who's like 5 feet tall and weighs like 80 pounds, but is down. You know, they said, what? Let's go fight him. Dude. Look, you're 5 feet tall. You don't want to be that person, because it doesn't matter if you're willing to. Sorry, it matters. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Being willing isn't enough. Being willing isn't enough. You also have to be able and to be capable. So you might be willing to jump the Grand Canyon, but you're not capable. And in fact, what happens now, if you try to jump the Grand Canyon, well, you're going to die. And now what has to happen? Now we got to get a helicopter or something. We have to go down there. We have to go get you to bring you back up. Now we have to bury you. It would have been better if you just had never gotten involved in the first place. You don't want to be that person in your life. You want to be the person who's willing. Yes, that's step one. But part of being willing, you also have the responsibility to develop yourself in such a way that you're actually useful for that thing, to be capable for that one thing. This is why every situation that you find yourself in, try to learn from it. If you're in a class that you just don't enjoy, you gotta be there anyway, man. Learn something from it. Why? Because when are you ever going to need to know the stuff I'm teaching you? I don't know. I know it's been incredibly useful in my life, and I know that it has been incredibly unuseful in the lives of people who never learned it. You understand? If you don't know it, then you'll never be able to use it. But if you're ever in an opportunity where you can use it, you'll be really glad that you have it. It's, for example, like why would it be a good idea to learn how to fight? So that you can if you ever need to. That's why. There's a certain peace that you have about yourself. You'll notice that people who are highly skilled fighters don't tend to walk around trying to pick fights with people. You don't need to. You know, you have all the fighting that you need when you go to your gym. You can spar with really high-level people all day. People who know that they're capable of that don't feel the need to prove it all the time to people. You know? And there's always that thing of like someone who like first starts to learn how to box. I think I told you a story last week about that. Someone who like just starts to learn how to box, and then they want to go out and want to go box with somebody in the street. Yeah. Until you learn a real skill set, then you won't feel the need to do that anymore. In fact, you're going to realize that you have a responsibility not to. But if you're trained properly, you have a monster inside of you, and you have claws to match. In other words, you might be willing to become a monster, but you better have some claws to match you as well. That's why you should develop those things. what's the point in having an opinion that you can't support? You have an opinion and someone tells you, shut up. You're like, well, or what? Or else I'm going to kill you. Okay, but I'm still right. No, you have to have the ability to be an enemy as well. Because otherwise you're just a liability. Again, you think about not even just jumping the Grand Canyon, but you've got this one very small friend with you, and then you get into a fight and then they jump in. And you know they're going to get their butt kicked, so what do you have to do? You got to protect them now. And then if you're protecting them, that means you're not protecting yourself as much. And then because they jump in, now somebody else's friends jump in. It just becomes a huge mess because of the one incapable person who was far more willing than they were capable. Become capable. When will you need that skill set? I don't know. But it's much better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And it's much better to have it than to not even know that you could have used it in those circumstances. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?